The grand chamber of the Galactic Council had stood for 12,000 years. Its walls were made of crystal harvested from dying stars, and its ceiling displayed a living map of every known world in the galaxy. Representatives from 300 species had gathered here to debate, argue, and shape the future of civilization itself. But today the chamber was different. Today there was fear in the air. Ambassador Zyrthax of the Velnorian hegemony stood near the central podium, his 4 purple eyes scanning the holographic display before him. The Velnorians were an ancient race, proud and powerful. With skin like polished silver and voices that echoed like distant thunder, they had been among the founders of the council. And Zyrthax had spent 2 centuries believing that his people understood the galaxy better than anyone else. He was about to learn how wrong he had been. The human delegation's transmission flickered to life in the center of the chamber. Every representative fell silent. The humans had requested this emergency session 3 days ago, and rumors had spread like wildfire through the diplomatic networks. Something was happening. Something big. Only one human appeared on the screen. Her name was Katie Moore, and she was the youngest ambassador humanity had ever sent to the council. She was 34 years old, with brown hair cut short and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore no jewelry, no symbols of rank, nothing but a simple gray uniform. Behind her, through the viewport of her ship, the stars seemed brighter than usual. Katie did not smile. She did not offer the traditional greetings that protocol demanded. She simply looked at the assembled representatives and began to speak. 6 months ago, the colony on Kepler-7 experienced a catastrophic failure of its atmospheric processors. 200,000 human beings, including 40,000 children, faced death by suffocation. Our distress signals reached this council within hours. Zyrthax shifted uncomfortably. He remembered the Kepler incident. Everyone did. Your emergency response fleet was stationed less than 2 days away, Katie continued. They had the equipment, the personnel, and the supplies to save everyone. Instead, they sat in orbit for 11 days while your bureaucrats debated whether humans qualified for immediate rescue under Section 47 of the Provisional Species Emergency Protocol. High Chancellor Morthax. The insectoid leader of the council rose from his elevated seat. His body was covered in chitinous armor, the color of dried blood, and his mandibles clicked as he prepared to speak. Ambassador Moore, the protocols exist for good reason. The council cannot show favoritism. Every species must be treated according to the same standards. And humans have not yet completed the integration requirements for full membership. The rescue fleet acted within the bounds of established law. Katie's expression did not change. By the time your fleet decided we were worth saving, 183,000 people were dead. The remaining 17,000 survived only because human engineers managed to jury-rig a partial atmospheric system from salvaged parts. My daughter was on Kepler-7, Chancellor. She was 7 years old. She did not survive. The chamber went absolutely silent. Several delegates looked away, unable to meet the human ambassador's gaze. We have spent 40 years trying to earn your respect, Katie said. We shared our medical technology freely, asking nothing in return. We sent our soldiers to die defending worlds that were not our own. We opened our colonies to refugees from a dozen species, feeding and housing millions who had nowhere else to go. And when we asked to be treated as equals, you told us to wait, to be patient, to prove ourselves worthy. She took a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was perfectly controlled, but something dangerous lurked beneath the surface. We are done proving ourselves. The holographic display expanded, showing the space around Katie's ship. What the council saw made several delegates gasp in shock. Thousands upon thousands of vessels filled the void, stretching beyond the range of the sensors. Colony ships the size of small moons. Freighters loaded with supplies. Military escorts bristling with weapons. And more were arriving every minute, jumping in from every corner of human-controlled space. What is this? Zyrthax demanded. What are you doing? Katie looked at him with an expression that he would remember for the rest of his life. It was not anger. It was not hatred. It was something far worse. It was the look of someone who had simply stopped caring. We are leaving, she said. Every human being in the galaxy, every colony, every station, every outpost, every ship. We are taking our technology, our research, our trade agreements, and our people, and we are going somewhere else. Somewhere you will never find us. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted questions, demands, and protests. Chancellor Morthax slammed his ceremonial staff against the floor, trying to restore order, but no one was listening. Trade Minister Plix of the Quarry Consortium pushed his way to a microphone. The Quarry were small, furry creatures with enormous eyes and quick minds for business. Plix had made his fortune trading human goods across the galaxy. "You cannot do this," he squeaked. "The economic implications alone would be catastrophic. Half the galaxy depends on human products and services. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you let our children die." Katie replied. Admiral Vexinar of the United Species Defense Force stepped forward. He was a massive reptilian creature, scarred from 100 battles, and he had fought alongside human soldiers for decades. "Ambassador Moore, I understand your anger. The Kepler incident was a tragedy and mistakes were made. But surely we can find a solution that does not involve abandoning everything we have built together." For a moment, something flickered in Katie's eyes. Sadness, perhaps, or regret. "Admiral, I have always respected you. You treated us fairly when others did not. But this decision was not made in anger. We have been discussing it for years, ever since the Council rejected our application for full membership the third time. Kepler was simply the last in a long line of insults." She gestured to the fleet behind her. "We have been preparing for this day for a long time. While your council debated whether we deserved a seat at your table, we were building ships, developing new technologies, mapping routes to other galaxies. We hoped we would never have to use them. We hoped that someday you would accept us as equals." Katie shook her head slowly. "That hope died on Kepler 7, along with my daughter and 182,999 other human beings." Chancellor Morthax finally managed to silence the chamber. He approached the holographic display, his ancient eyes studying the human ambassador with newfound concern. "Ambassador Moore, I urge you to reconsider. The Council is prepared to discuss reforms to review the emergency protocols, to address your grievances through proper diplomatic channels." Katie actually smiled at that, though there was no warmth in it. 40 years ago, we came to you with open hands and hopeful hearts. We asked only for a chance to prove ourselves. You gave us tests and trials and endless requirements, and every time we met your standards, you raised them higher. We were never going to be good enough for you, Chancellor. We understand that now. She straightened her shoulders. In 3 days, the last human ship will leave this galaxy. You will never see us again. I hope that whatever comes next, you remember this moment. Remember that you had a chance to treat us with dignity, and you chose not to. The transmission ended. In the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, surrounded by representatives of 300 species, there was only silence. And for the first time in 12,000 years, that silence was filled with fear. The news spread across the galaxy like a shockwave. Within hours of Ambassador Moore's announcement, every major news network was broadcasting the same footage. The human fleet. The calm voice of the human ambassador. The stunned faces of the council delegates. And everywhere the same question was being asked. What would happen when the humans were gone? On the Vilnorian homeworld, a planet of silver towers and endless commerce, Grand Merchant Kelvax sat alone in his office and stared at numbers that refused to make sense. He had spent his entire career building trade networks, and he knew every detail of the galactic economy better than anyone alive. What he saw on his screens terrified him. Human-designed fusion reactors powered 63% of all interstellar shipping. Without regular maintenance from human engineers, those reactors would begin failing within 2 years. Human agricultural techniques, developed over centuries of trial and error, had increased crop yields on 47 worlds. The species living on those worlds had forgotten how to farm any other way. Human entertainment, their music and stories and games, generated more economic activity than the entire mining output of the asteroid belts. Kelvax ran the calculations again and again, hoping to find an error. There was none. If the humans left, the galactic economy would not just suffer. It would collapse entirely. He reached for his communication device and called his assistant. "Get me everything we have on human departure preparations, every detail, every timeline, every possible point of negotiation." "Sir," his assistant replied nervously, "the humans are not negotiating. They have refused all communications from trade representatives." Kelvax closed his 4 eyes and tried to control his breathing. In 200 years of business, he had never encountered a problem he could not solve with a right offer. The humans had just shown him that some things could not be bought across the galaxy, on a military station, orbiting a dying star. Admiral Vexinar was having a similar realization. He stood in the war room surrounded by tactical displays and fleet projections. Watching his life's work crumble before his eyes, the United Species Defense Force had been the galaxy's shield for 10,000 years. But in the last century, that shield had become increasingly dependent on human contributions. Human pilots were the best in the fleet, able to fly maneuvers that other species considered impossible. Human tacticians had developed strategies that had turned the tide in a dozen wars. Human shipyards produced vessels that were faster, tougher, and more innovative than anything else in the galaxy. And now they were leaving. "Show me the projections," Vexinar ordered. His aide, a young quarry officer named TX, pulled up a holographic display. "Sir, without human forces, we lose approximately 40% of our combat effectiveness immediately. Within 5 years, as human-designed systems begin to fail and we cannot replicate them, that number rises to 60%.
Ow.
And the Razak swarm?"
TX hesitated. The Razak were the galaxy's nightmare, a hive mind species that existed only to consume and expand. For centuries, they had been held at bay by the combined might of the Defense Force, but that might had always included humans. "Our analysts believe the Razak will detect our weakness within 2 years, TX said quietly. "They will begin major offensive operations within 3. Without human support, we estimate the outer territories will fall within a decade." Vexinar said nothing. He simply stared at the projection of the human fleet, watching ship after ship disappear into the void between galaxies. On Helios Prime, in the great medical research station that orbited the planet like a silver ring, Dr. Yuvin was experiencing a different kind of despair. The Silthian people were dying. They had been dying for centuries, slowly consumed by a disease called the wasting that turned their bodies against themselves. And the humans had been so close to finding a cure. Yvonne walked through the corridors of the research wing, watching human scientists pack their equipment into transport containers. They worked quickly and efficiently, speaking to each other in low voices, occasionally glancing at their alien colleagues with expressions of genuine sadness. He found Charlie Webb in Laboratory 7, carefully securing a rack of genetic samples. Charlie was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and gentle hands. He had been working on the wasting cure for 15 years, longer than any other researcher on the project. "Please," Yvonne said, "you cannot leave now. We are so close. Another year, maybe 2, and we could have the answer." "Hey." Charlie stopped packing. He looked at Yvonne with something like grief. "Do you know why I came here, doctor?" "To this station, to work on this disease." Yvonne shook his head. "'Cause my grandmother was a refugee," Charlie said. "During the water wars on Earth, before we reached the stars, her family lost everything. They were taken in by strangers who had no reason to help them but did it anyway. She told me stories about that kindness every day until she died." He resumed packing, his movements slower now. "I wanted to be like those strangers. I wanted to help people who were suffering, even if they were different from me." "Then why are you leaving?" Charlie was quiet for a long moment. "Because helping people should go both ways. Doctor, we gave and gave and gave, and when we needed help, when our people were suffocating on Kepler the 7th, your council let them die while arguing about paperwork." He sealed the container and looked at Yvonne. "I am not leaving because I hate you. I am leaving Because I am tired. We are all tired. Yvonne watched him carry the container toward the transport bay. He wanted to argue, to beg, to find some combination of words that would make the humans stay. But he knew there were no such words. The humans had made their decision, and nothing the galaxy said now would change it. In the great cities of 100 worlds, similar scenes were playing out. Human doctors handing over patient files and walking away. Human teachers saying goodbye to students who did not understand what was happening. Human engineers shutting down systems they had built and maintained for decades, and everywhere. The same terrible realization was taking hold. The galaxy had treated humans as useful tools, as clever workers who could solve problems but never quite deserved full respect. And now those tools were walking away, taking their knowledge and skills and innovation with them. On the planet Carthax, a young Velnorian girl named Shira sat with her human friend Danny in a small garden behind their school. They had grown up together, played together, studied together. Danny had taught Shira how to play human card games, and she had taught him how to sing Velnorian harmony songs. "I do not understand," Shira said, her silver face wet with tears. "Why do you have to go? What did we do wrong?" Danny was only 12 years old, too young to fully understand the politics behind his people's departure. But he had seen the footage from Kepler-7. He had watched his parents cry when the news came. And he had heard the anger in their voices when they talked about the council. "My dad says that your people were not fair to us," Danny said slowly. "He says that we tried to be friends, but you would not let us be equals." "But I let you be equal," Shira protested. "I never treated you different." Danny reached out and took her hand. "I know, and I will miss you. Maybe when we are grown up, when things are different, we can find each other again." But even as he said it, they both knew it was not true. The humans were leaving, and they were not coming back. In the garden, surrounded by flowers that had been grown from seeds brought from Earth, two children held hands and mourned the end of a friendship. And across the galaxy, 1,000 other goodbyes were being spoken. Each one a small tragedy in a much larger story. The humans were leaving. And the galaxy was only beginning to understand what it would lose. High Chancellor Morthax had ruled the Galactic Council for 300 years. In that time, he had faced wars, plagues, economic collapses, and threats that would have destroyed lesser civilizations. He had always found a way through. He had always believed that patience and wisdom could solve any problem. Now, for the first time in his long life, he was afraid. The emergency summit had been called within hours of Ambassador Moore's announcement. Representatives from every major species had dropped everything and rushed to the Grand Chamber. Some had traveled for days without sleep. Others had abandoned important negotiations and critical projects. They all understood that this was different from any crisis they had faced before. The chamber was packed. Delegates filled every seat, stood in the aisles, and crowded around the walls. The holographic displays showed the latest images of the human fleet, which had grown even larger in the 2 days since the announcement. Military analysts estimated that nearly 90% of all humans in the galaxy were now aboard those ships. Morthax raised his ceremonial staff and called the summit to order. The chamber fell silent. "We are gathered here to discuss the human exodus," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I will not waste time with pleasantries or protocol. We all understand the severity of the situation. The floor is open for proposals." Ambassador Zyrthox of the Velnorians was the first to speak. He strode to the central podium, his silver skin gleaming under the chamber's lights, his 4 eyes burning with barely contained fury. "The solution is obvious," he declared. "We must stop them, by force if necessary. The humans cannot be allowed to simply walk away with technology and resources that the galaxy needs to survive. I propose an immediate military blockade of their departure corridor." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several delegates nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain. Admiral Vexinar rose from his seat in the military section. His scarred reptilian face showed no emotion, but his voice carried a bitter edge. "Ambassador Zyrthax, I respect your passion, but your proposal is not merely unwise. It is impossible. Impossible." Zyrthox sputtered. We have the largest fleet in galactic history. The humans are a minor species with limited military resources. That is what we believed, Vexenar replied. We were wrong, he gestured, and new images appeared on the holographic displays. In the past week, our scouts have attempted to approach the human fleet. Every attempt has been turned back by weapon systems we have never seen before. Long-range sensors indicate that the humans have developed defensive technologies that are at least 2 generations ahead of anything we possess. The chamber erupted into shocked whispers. How is that possible? Demanded one delegate. We monitored their research programs. We had observers in their facilities. Apparently we did not observe as carefully as we thought, Vexenar said. The humans have been preparing for this departure for decades. While we debated whether they deserved full membership, they were building an escape route. They let us see what they wanted us to see. Trade Minister Plix jumped to his feet. Then we must negotiate. Offer them whatever they want. Full citizenship. A seat on the High Council. Reparations for Kepler-7. There must be something they will accept in exchange for staying. Morthox nodded slowly. We have already made such offers. Their response arrived this morning. He activated a new holographic display. Ambassador Moore's face appeared once again. Katie looked different in this recording. She seemed older somehow, as if the weight of speaking for her entire species had aged her overnight, but her voice was as steady as ever. We have received your proposals, she said. Full citizenship, reparations, a seat on the High Council, formal apology for the Kepler incident. These are impressive offers. A year ago, we would have been overjoyed to receive them. She paused, and something like sadness crossed her face. But you need to understand something. This is not a negotiation. We are not making demands. We are not trying to pressure you into giving us a better deal. We are simply leaving. Katie leaned forward slightly. For 40 years, we asked to be treated as equals. We followed every rule. We met every requirement. We proved ourselves again and again in ways that no other species has ever been asked to match, and it was never enough. There was always another test, another qualification, another reason why we were not quite ready for full acceptance. Her voice hardened. And then Kepler happened. 200,000 of our people died because a bureaucrat decided that following protocol was more important than saving lives. And the Council's response was to offer condolences and promise a review of emergency procedures. She shook her head. We do not want your apologies anymore. We do not want your promises. We do not want your full membership or your seat on the Council. We want something you cannot give us. We want to be somewhere where we do not have to constantly prove that our lives have value. The recording ended. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke up. It was Dr. Yvonne, the Silthian scientist who had been working with human researchers on the wasting cure. May I address the Council? Morthax nodded. YUVAN made his way slowly to the central podium. He was old for his species. His scaled skin faded to a dull gray, his movements careful and deliberate. But his eyes were sharp with intelligence and grief. I've worked with humans for 30 years, he said. I have seen them at their best and their worst. I have watched them solve problems that our greatest minds considered impossible, and I have seen them show kindness to strangers when they had nothing to gain from doing so. He looked around the chamber. We made a terrible mistake. Not just at Kepler, but in everything that came before. We saw the humans as useful. We saw them as clever workers who could solve our problems. But we never saw them as equals. We never truly believed that they belonged among us. Yvonne's voice broke slightly. And now they are leaving. Not because they hate us. Not because they want revenge. But because they are tired of being treated as less than they are. They are tired of proving themselves to people who will never accept them no matter what they do. He turned to face Morthax directly. There is nothing we can offer them that will undo the decades of disrespect. The humans are not negotiating because they have already given up on us. They have decided that a fresh start in another galaxy is better than spending another century being treated as second-class citizens. The old scientist's words hung in the air. Around the chamber, delegates shifted uncomfortably. Some looked angry. Others looked ashamed. A few were crying. Ambassador Zirathax strode back to the podium, pushing Yuvan aside. This is weakness. Sentimental nonsense. The humans are leaving because we allowed them to become too powerful, too independent. We should have maintained tighter control from the beginning. We should never have let them develop their own technologies, their own military capabilities, their own colonies. And what would you have had us do instead? Asked a quiet voice. It was Nyx, a young Quarry delegate who had never spoken in the chamber before. Keep them as servants? Slaves? Is that the galactic unity you believe in? Zyrthox turned to face her, his 4 eyes blazing. I believe in the survival of our civilization. I believe in maintaining order and stability. The humans were a minor species who got above themselves. And now they are threatening the entire galaxy with their departure. No, Nyx replied softly. We are threatening ourselves. The humans are simply showing us the consequences of our own choices. The summit continued for hours. Proposals were made and rejected. Arguments grew heated and then died down into exhausted silence. And through it all, the images of the human fleet remained on the displays, constant reminder of what was about to be lost. In the end, no agreement was reached. No solution was found. The humans had made their decision, and the galaxy could only watch as they prepared to leave forever. Outside the chamber, standing on a balcony overlooking the crystal spires of the council city, Morthax looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, among those countless points of light, the humans were gathering for their great departure. He wondered if they would ever look back. The human exodus took 3 standard months to complete. Every day, ships arrived at the gathering point at the edge of the galaxy. Every day. More humans said their final goodbyes and boarded transports that would carry them away from everything they had known. And every day, the alien species who had shared their worlds with humans watched in silence as their friends, colleagues, and neighbors disappeared one by one. On the mining world of Arcturus Vi, a Velnorian overseer named Vex stood at the entrance to the transport hub and watched the humans file past. He had worked with these people for 20 years. He knew their names, their families, their hopes and fears. He had shared meals with them, celebrated their holidays, mourned their losses, and now they were leaving, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. A young woman named Lisa Grant paused as she passed him. She was carrying a small bag and holding the hand of a child who could not have been more than 5 years old. Vex remembered when Lisa had first arrived on Arcturus, fresh from the academy, eager to prove herself. He remembered her wedding 3 years later and the joy on her face when her daughter was born. I wish you would stay, Vex said quietly. Lisa looked at him with tired eyes. So do I sometimes. This world has been my home for a long time. My daughter was born here. She has never known anywhere else. Then why leave? Why not wait and see if things change? Lisa smiled sadly. Because we have been waiting for 40 years, Dex. We have been patient. We have been hopeful. We have told ourselves that if we just worked harder, proved ourselves better, eventually your people would accept us as equals. She shook her head. After Kepler, we finally understood the truth. It was never going to happen. We were never going to be good enough, no matter what we did. Vex wanted to argue, to promise that things would be different from now on, that the council had learned its lesson. But he could not. He had seen the emergency summit proceedings. He had heard Ambassador Zyrthax talking about humans as problems to be controlled rather than people to be respected. The same attitudes that had caused this disaster were still there, unchanged by everything that had happened. I am sorry, he said finally. For what it is worth, I always thought of you as my friend. Lisa reached out and touched his arm. You were one of the good ones, Vex. I will remember that. I will make sure my daughter knows that not everyone here treated us badly. She walked away, disappearing into the crowd of humans boarding the transport. Dex watched until she was gone, then turned and walked slowly back to the empty mining complex where no one would be working anymore. Across the galaxy, on the pleasure world of New Eden, a human musician named Jake was playing his final concert. The amphitheater was packed with beings from a dozen different species. all gathered to hear one last performance before the humans left. Jake sat alone on the stage with his guitar, an ancient instrument that had been in his family for generations. He had played at this amphitheater 100 times over the years. He had seen audiences laugh and cry and dance to his music. He had believed, foolishly perhaps, that music could bridge any gap, connect any species, heal any wound. Now, he understood that some wounds were too deep for music to reach. "This song is called Farewell," he said into the microphone. "I wrote it last week. It is not a happy song, but I think it is an honest one." He began to play. The melody was simple, haunting, full of loss and regret. The words spoke of homes left behind, of friendships cut short, of doors closing that would never open again. When he finished, the audience sat in stunned silence. Then slowly, they began to applaud. Jake looked out at the crowd and saw tears on alien faces. Velnorians and Quari and Silthians and a dozen other species, all weeping for something they were only now beginning to understand they had lost. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I hope that someday, somewhere, you will remember that we were here too, that we tried to be your friends." He left the stage without looking back. In the orbital stations above Earth, the last preparations were being made. Admiral Sarah Palmer, commander of the human Exodus fleet, stood on the bridge of the flagship Horizon and watched the final transports dock. She was 62 years old, career military officer who had spent her entire adult life serving the United Species Defense Force. She had fought alongside aliens in a dozen campaigns. She had commanded mixed species crews. She had believed in the dream of galactic unity with all her heart. The Kepler incident had shattered that belief. When she had learned that rescue ships had sat in orbit for 11 days while human colonists suffocated, something inside her had broken. When she had read the Council's official report, which described the delay as unfortunate but procedurally correct, that broken thing had turned to cold, hard resolve. Admiral said her executive officer, a young man named Pete Sullivan. "The last transports have docked. All personnel are aboard. We are ready to begin the departure sequence." Sarah nodded slowly. "And the Council's final appeal? Arrived 10 minutes ago. High Chancellor Morthax is offering full citizenship, immediate membership on the High Council, and a complete revision of all emergency protocols. He says the galaxy needs us and begs us to reconsider." Sarah smiled grimly. 40 years ago, we would have danced in the streets for an offer like that. Now it feels like a bribe. She turned to face her bridge crew. "Begin the departure sequence. All ships, coordinate for sequential jump." The order went out across the fleet. 10,000 ships began powering up their jump drives, preparing to leave the galaxy forever. The energy readings were detected by every sensor station in the region, triggering alerts across 100 worlds. In the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, delegates watched in horror as the holographic display showed the human fleet beginning to move. Ship after ship accelerated toward the edge of the galaxy, forming a vast convoy that stretched across light years of space. "They are really leaving," whispered Trade Minister Plix. "They are actually doing it." Admiral Vexinar stood rigidly at attention, watching the ships of his former human colleagues disappear one by one. He had served with humans for 50 years. He had trusted them with his life in battle. And now they were gone, and he knew that nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same at the edge of the fleet. Aboard a small transport ship, Katie Moore stood at a viewport and watched the stars of her home galaxy grow smaller. Her daughter's ashes were in a small urn at her feet. She had planned to scatter them on Kepler 7, on the world where her child had died. But in the end, she had decided to bring them along instead. Wherever the humans were going, her daughter would go with them. "Ambassador," said a voice behind her. It was her aide, a young man named Chris. "We are approaching the jump point. The fleet commanders are requesting your authorization for the final transition." Katie took a deep breath. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what they were doing. They were leaving behind everything humanity had built over the past century. The colonies, the stations, the friendships, the The dreams of a galaxy united in peace and cooperation, but they were also leaving behind the discrimination, the endless tests and requirements, the feeling of always being judged, always being found wanting, always being reminded that they did not quite belong. They were leaving behind the memory of Kepler-7 and the bureaucrats who had let 200,000 people die rather than break protocol. "Authorization granted," she said quietly. "Tell the fleet commanders to proceed." The jump drives activated. One by one, the human ships vanished into the void between galaxies, leaving behind nothing but sensor echoes and the fading light of their engines. In the Grand Chamber, High Chancellor Morthax watched the last human ship disappear. The displays showed empty space where moments ago there had been 10,000 vessels carrying the entirety of humanity. "They are gone," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They are really gone." Around him, the delegates of the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence. For the first time in 12,000 years, the chamber had no idea what to do next. The humans had left, and the galaxy would never be the same again. 5 years had passed since the humans left. In the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, the empty seats told a story of decline. Delegations that had once filled the room were now reduced to a handful of survivors. Species that had been conquered by the Razak swarm sent no representatives at all. The great crystal walls were cracked in places, and the living star map in the ceiling flickered with dead zones where civilizations had once thrived. "Hi." Chancellor Morthax stood at the central podium, looking older than anyone had ever seen him. His chitinous armor had faded from blood red to a dull brown, and his movements were slow and careful. The confidence that had defined his 3 centuries of leadership was gone, replaced by something that looked very much like defeat. "The Razak offensive has reached the inner territories," he announced to the diminished assembly. "The defensive line at Vex Prime has fallen. Admiral Vexinar died leading the retreat. He saved 14 million civilians by holding the line long enough for the evacuation ships to escape." Murmurs of grief rippled through the chamber. Vexinar had been a hero, the last great commander of the United Species Defense Force. His death felt like the end of an era. "Our analysts project that the Razak will reach the core worlds within 2 years, Morthax continued. "Our fleet is too weak to stop them. Our technologies are failing. Our economies have collapsed." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "We are dying." The chamber remained silent. There was nothing to say. Everyone present knew the truth. The galaxy was falling apart. There was no one left who could save it. After the session ended, Morthax retreated to his private chambers. He sat alone in the darkness, surrounded by artifacts from 1,000 years of galactic history, and wondered how everything had gone so wrong. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door opened, and Dr. Yuvan entered slowly. The old Silthian scientist had survived the wasting thanks to the cure that Charlie Webb had sent before the humans departed. But he was one of the few. His species was nearly extinct now, reduced to a few thousand survivors scattered across refugee camps. "I received another message," Yuvan said quietly. Morthax looked up. "From the humans?" Yuvan nodded. "It was sent the day they left, programmed to arrive at intervals over the following decades. Charlie Webb recorded dozens of them, each containing information we might need. What does this one contain?" Yuvan's ancient eyes were wet with tears. "Instructions for building a new type of shield generator. Something that might be able to stop the Razak advance." He paused. Charlie knew we would need this eventually. He prepared it before he left, knowing he would never see whether we used it. Morthax stared at the old scientist for a long moment. They knew we would fail without them. They knew the Razak would come. And still, they helped us. "That is who the humans were," Yuvan replied. "Even after everything we did to them, they could not simply let us die. Charlie told me once that his grandmother taught him that kindness should not require repayment, that helping others was its own reward." The Chancellor rose from his chair and walked to the window. Outside, the city was darker than it should have been. Power failures had become common as human design systems continued to break. Down in the distance, he could see refugee camps filled with beings who had fled the Razak advance. The galaxy that had once seemed so stable, so permanent, was crumbling before his eyes. "Do you think they are watching us?" Morthax asked. "The humans. Do you think they know what has happened here?" Yvonne considered the question. "I do not know. Perhaps they have technologies we never understood. It would not surprise me if they have ways of monitoring the galaxy from wherever they have gone. And if they are watching, what do you think they see?" The old scientist was quiet for a long time. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of all his years. "I think they see exactly what they expected to see. A galaxy that could not function without them. Species tearing themselves apart over resources and territory. The Razak consuming everything in their path." He paused. "They see us proving them right." Morthax turned away from the window. "We should have listened. When they asked for equality, we should have given it to them. When they proved themselves again and again, we should have accepted them. When Kepler happened, we should have apologized, truly apologized, and changed everything that allowed such a tragedy to occur." "Yes," Yvonne agreed. "We should have. But we did not. And now it is too late." The two old leaders sat together in silence, contemplating the ruins of everything they had once believed in, far away. In another galaxy entirely, the humans were building their new civilization. They had found a cluster of habitable worlds near a stable yellow star, not unlike the sun that had warmed Earth so long ago. They had named their new home Haven, and in 5 years they had already accomplished more than most species managed in centuries. Admiral Sarah Palmer, now retired from military service, stood on a hillside overlooking the capital city of the main colony world. The city was beautiful, with graceful towers and wide green parks and fountains that sparkled in the afternoon light. Children played in the streets without fear. People of all backgrounds worked together without prejudice or discrimination. It was everything humanity had dreamed of creating in the old galaxy, everything they had been denied. Katie Moore stood beside her, older now, with gray streaks in her hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She had served as the first president of the Haven Federation for 3 years before stepping down to let younger leaders take over. Now she spent her time teaching history at the university, making sure the next generation understood where they had come from and why. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Leaving, I mean, do you ever wonder if we could have stayed and changed things?" Katie was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, late at night, when I cannot sleep, I think about the people we left behind. The friends. The colleagues. The beings who treated us fairly, even when their governments did not." She shook her head slowly. "But then I remember Kepler. I remember watching the rescue ships sit in orbit while my daughter suffocated. And I know we made the right choice." Sarah nodded. "The reports from the old galaxy are getting worse. The Razak have broken through the last major defensive line. The analysts say total collapse is inevitable within a decade." "I know." Katie's voice was heavy with something that might have been grief, or might have been acceptance. "We sent them everything we could. Cures for diseases. Technologies that might save them. Charlie Webb spent the last year of his life recording messages full of information they would need. If they cannot survive with all of that, then perhaps they were never going to survive regardless of what we did. Some of them blame us, you know? There are factions in the old galaxy that say we betrayed them by leaving." Katie laughed bitterly. "Let them blame us. We spent 40 years being blamed for everything from economic problems to bad weather. Being blamed for leaving is no different." She turned to face Sarah directly. "We gave them everything we had, and they treated us like servants. We asked for nothing but respect, and they could not even give us that. The Kepler incident was not an accident or a mistake. It was the logical result of a system that never valued human life the way it should have." She looked out at the city below, at the children playing, at the families walking together, at the future that humanity was building for itself. Here, on Haven, no child will ever suffocate while bureaucrats debate whether they deserve to be saved. No one will ever be told they are not good enough, not worthy enough, not equal enough. That is what we fought for. That is what we left everything behind to create. Sarah followed her gaze. It is beautiful, is it not? What we have built here, as Katie agreed. It is beautiful, and it is ours. Truly ours, in a way that nothing in the old galaxy ever was. They stood together on the hillside as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange and pink. Behind them, the capital city hummed with life and activity. Before them, the future stretched out like an endless road, full of possibilities that the old galaxy had never allowed them to imagine. The humans had found their new home, and though they would always carry the memories of what had been lost, they would also carry the hope of what was yet to come in the old galaxy. The stars continued to fade one by one as the Razak advanced and civilizations fell. And in the councils and chambers where decisions were made, the survivors could only look at the empty space where humanity had once stood and wonder what might have been. Different if they had simply learned to treat others the way they wished, to be treated themselves, but it was too late for wondering. It had been too late from the moment the first human ship vanished into the void between galaxies, carrying with it not just a species, but a lesson that the galaxy had refused to learn. Some mistakes cannot be undone. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. And some departures are forever. The humans were gone, and the galaxy they left behind would never forget them, even as it crumbled into dust.